Arthur Meyerowitz was a young man from the Bronx. He once stepped in to defend a neighbor from an abusive husband. He carried a quiet sense of justice and a deep-seated desire for adventure. When Pearl Harbor shattered America's peace, he, like countless others, answered the call. He re-enlisted with fervent patriotism. He believed flying offered a better chance of survival than the brutal grind of ground combat. He articulated this conviction to his family with grim determination. He said, "If I'm going to die, I'd rather fly. I don't want to die on the ground." His path, however, was anything but straightforward. A retinal procedure in late 1942 unexpectedly disqualified him from pilot training. This was an abrupt turn. It challenged the myth of a purely heroic and unblemished journey to the skies. Undeterred, Arthur adapted. He volunteered for the arduous lecture-filled training to become an airplane flight engineer and top turret gunner. He logged a scant 48 hours in the air. He was then promoted to Staff Sergeant in October 1943. His rapid deployment reflected the urgent, almost desperate, need for combat personnel in the European theatre. The Allied command pressed for the magic number of 25 missions. This quota often superseded safety concerns in the relentless pursuit of operational goals. Crews were thrown into the fray with minimal experience. They flew B-24 bombers, notoriously dubbed flying coffins. These planes were known for their limited exits and susceptibility to fire. They faced German aerial tactics and formidable ground defenses. High casualty rates for bomber crews, the highest of any service branch, became a grim reality for new arrivals. Arthur's crew landed at Seething Airfield, England. It was early December 1943. They were immediately immersed in the harsh realities of war. The air in the Nissen huts reeked of coal smoke and damp wool. New recruits were met with stark warnings. Just a week after his chilling maiden mission on December 24th, Arthur prepared for his second flight. During that mission, he witnessed B-24s fold upward like fiery butterflies. His second flight was on New Year's Eve. That morning, inspecting harmful Lil Armful, he discovered fresh damage to the No. 3 engine. The damage was from previous anti-aircraft fire. He urged his pilot, Second Lieutenant Philip Chase, to address the damage. But Chase, eager to complete his tour, dismissed the concerns. He overrode any lingering safety protocols in favor of the mission. This pivotal decision was a stark example of systemic pressure overriding individual caution. It sealed the bomber's fate. The 18 B-24s departed Seething at 8:15 a.m. Their powerful Pratt & Whitney engines pierced the gloomy grey skies. Arthur was positioned in the Martin Electric upper-deck top-ball turret. He scanned the gunmetal grey clouds. Inside the unheated bomber, frigid temperatures frosted over gauges and dials. Harmful Lil Armful entered enemy airspace. The mission, initially dismissed by Chase as a milk run, rapidly devolved into a harrowing ordeal. Arthur engaged Me-109s with the tremendous kick and noise of his .50 caliber Browning machine guns. He downed one. But the true terror came from below. The German 88mm anti-aircraft cannon proved a far greater threat than enemy fighters. Its shells burst with immense psychological trauma. The air filled with clumps of black smoke and blinding bursts of flak. This created a kill zone that tore through planes and men. It inflicted a visceral dread. The tension inside the bomber was palpable. Then, with a concussive blast, an 88mm shell found its mark. The harmful Lil Armful took a direct hit on its No. 3 engine. The impact signaled its demise. Thick, acrid smoke and flames billowed from the crippled engine. They immersed the right wing. The bomber became a hobbled animal. It rapidly separated from the formation. This direct strike left the bomber severely damaged. It was a stark illustration of the tension between individual survival and the relentless, unforgiving systemic pressures of wartime operations. The B-24, harmful Lil Armful, was now a mortally wounded beast. It shuddered violently. Its crippled No. 3 engine was a raging inferno. Pilot Chase's voice, tight with panic, sliced through the intercom. Abandoned ship. Arthur grappled with the knowledge of McNamara's fatal wounds. He saw the silhouettes of pilots Chase and Thomas. These were the very men who had dismissed his warnings. They launched themselves into the icy abyss, A bitter fury, cold and sharp as the wind tearing at the fuselage, seized him. They were the first two guys out of the plane, he thought. A vow formed in his mind that such cowardice deserved the worst. But as he turned, Staff Sergeant Dunham, usually prone to panic, was still there. Instead of abandoning Arthur, Dunham, with a desperate shove, propelled Arthur out of the bomb bay. He then vanished back into the smoke-choked interior. It was a final, selfless act of loyalty amidst the chaos of a dying aircraft. The bomber, now empty of its last crewman, spiraled downwards. It was a fiery comet against the bruised sky. It slammed into the snow-dusted earth in a catastrophic explosion. Arthur plummeted through the frigid air. He landed with a searing pain in his lower back as his parachute lines snagged on a tree limb. He concealed his chute. He was shivering and in pain. He was isolated on New Year's Eve of 1943. He was in the soup. He was a lone American Jew in Nazi-occupied France. His very existence was a death sentence if discovered. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound, was a potential Gestapo patrol. Desperate, he made a choice. He heard a dog barking. Though it could easily be a German search dog, it was his only lead. He stumbled across a snow-cloaked field towards the sound. He emerged from the brush to find a squat farmhouse. A careworn farmer's wife, her face a map of hardship, surprised him with a warm smile. She offered an invitation. "Please come in," she said. She offered him meager but life-saving provisions. It was a small wedge of cheese, a few bread crusts, weak coffee. It was a profound act of kindness in a land ravaged by Nazi rationing. When she placed a Catholic St. Christopher medal in his hand, a symbol of safe passage, Arthur, though wary, had no choice but to trust. He clutched his chai necklace as he accepted this tentative shift from pure survival to reliance on strangers. This unsolicited aid, given without question, silently challenged the notion that French civilians were either collaborators or passive observers. Many were, in fact, hidden heroes. Far away, across the tempestuous Atlantic, Arthur's family was plunged into a parallel, devastating reality. A Western Union courier delivered the grim casualty telegram. It confirmed his presumed death. This created a stark emotional counterpoint to his precarious survival on the ground. Back in France, after several days of recovery, Marcel Taillandier arrived. He was a key local resistance leader codenamed Mohang. He arrived on his glowworm motorcycle. Taillandier, with a quick, assessing glance, noted Arthur's concealed knife. It was a sign of resilience and readiness. This American airman was no ordinary escapee. He was a high-priority asset. "It is not safe for you here," Taillandier declared, his voice firm. "We must go at once," he urged. "Weit, weit." His decision to integrate Arthur into the complex clandestine resistance network was immediate and absolute. It was a system of specialized handoffs operating under General de Gaulle's directives. Arthur, his lower back throbbing from a goose egg on his head, crammed into the sidecar. His life was now inextricably bound to the hidden war fought by the people of France. The cold comfort of the Barbot farm was a temporary haven. It was from the immediate aftermath of his crash. It soon gave way to the next stage of Arthur's perilous immersion into occupied France. The clandestine network was born from the strategic failures of 1940 and the brutal reality of the Franco-German armistice. It was a labyrinth of hidden loyalties and deadly risks. It was a world where men like Colonel Paul Pélalet played a dangerous dual game. They subtly undermined the Nazi regime from within Vichy's complicit structures. It was a world where Marcel Taillandier, known as Ricardo, had forged the ruthless Mohang-Die network. They were les chasseurs de traitors, the hunters of traitors. He turned the bustling Frascati bar in Toulouse into a vital, if deadly, hub of intelligence and retribution. That network had already proved its audacity. It ranged from the theft of Atlantic Wall blueprints to the grim escalation of executing collaborators. This was in the wake of the Gestapo's unspeakable brutality. This brutality was exemplified by the torture of Lily Camboville. Arthur, however, was still a pawn. He was guided by the unseen hands of these shadow warriors. His journey led him to the care of Dr. Pierre and Gisèle Chauvin. They were ordinary citizens whose courage transformed their home into a defiant outpost against the Nazi tide. There, Arthur endured a rigorous new form of training. He was to become Georges Lambert, a deaf-mute agricultural worker. This persona was painstakingly crafted by the Réseau Brutus network. Giselle's intense lessons were designed to strip away any involuntary reaction. They had been a grueling test of self-control. They prepared him for the silent masquerade that was now his only shield. Dressed in borrowed clothes and clutching forged papers, Arthur had then navigated the treacherous streets of Bordeaux. He successfully passed his first nerve-wracking encounter with a German policeman and a French collaborator. He had felt his hand tremble, sweat pricked his palms, but his feigned muteness held. The blank, unreactive expression was a perfect mask against the feral stare of the occupation. It was a small victory, but it affirmed the viability of his elaborate deception. Yet, the respite was always fleeting. The air in occupied France was thick with suspicion. The Gestapo's dragnet tightened daily. A neighboring farmer's suspicion, a whisper of potential betrayal, triggered another urgent relocation. It forced Arthur to flee through snow-covered woods. The guttural voices and barking dogs of a distant pursuit echoed in the wintry air. The warmth of brandy offered a fleeting comfort against the biting cold, but the constant fear of discovery gnawed at his resolve. He found temporary refuge with Madame Rigal and Mimi Dumas. Mimi was a kindly maternal woman who treated him like a son. But Madame Rigal's concern over Mimi's perceived loose tongue soon signaled a dramatic shift. The resistance, once a network of gentle, hidden saviors, was now entering a more brutal phase. Marcel Théandier himself arrived. He was accompanied by men with scarred, sullen faces and cold, cruel eyes. They looked more like gangsters than liberators. Théandier, broad-shouldered with a broken nose and an unsettling gaze, confronted Mimi. His presence was a stark reminder that Arthur's protection now fell to the ruthless pragmatism of the Morhan group. This new, dangerous phase culminated in a harrowing train journey to Toulouse. It was known as the Pink City. The winding cobblestoned roads and ancient towns of the Midi-Pyrenees blurred past, but the journey was punctuated by pervasive danger. At the Matabeo-Toulouse train station, a scene of high tension unfolded. Nazi soldiers and German shepherds patrolled everywhere. Their presence was an omnipresent threat. Arthur had witnessed a brutal incident where a dog leaped onto a young man. It tore at his face and neck while Gestapo agents watched, grinning. He had passed inspection. His papers were scrutinized. It was a close call among the blood-red, white and black swastika banners, flapping in the wind. His heart thumped against his ribs. In Toulouse, the deception deepened. Arthur was embedded with the Toulouse family. He posed as Georges, a deaf-mute from Algiers, with a limp from a farm accident. He was now working in their paint store. It was a more elaborate and risky cover. It was a daily tightrope walk, where one wrong move could mean torture and death. This period, from late 1943 into mid-1944, was indeed the most perilous. The Gestapo, ever more efficient and brutal, was actively cracking down on resistance networks like Brutus in the Bordeaux region. News of increased arrests underscored the escalating danger. Dr. Robert Neal, Jean-Pierre Dupin, Georges Tissot, and even the poor family in L'Esparre were targeted. Allied airmen, especially those disguised or Jewish, now faced not just capture, they faced brutal interrogations. Then came the grim prospect of Fresnes prison or the unspeakable horrors of concentration camps like Buchenwald. The very air vibrated with the tension of the impending D-Day. With it came heightened Nazi security. This made every train journey, every resistance operation, a gamble with death. Arthur's life, lived on the razor's edge, was a testament to the immense risks undertaken by ordinary French citizens. It was also a testament to the complex, often brutal, dedication of the French resistance, even as the Gestapo's iron fist tightened across occupied France, unleashing a wave of arrests that shattered resistant cells like Brutus. Individual acts of defiance continued to burn brightly. The raid on the Chauvin household was a stark example of this escalating brutality. Dr. Pierre Chauvin escaped by a whisker. His mother, Simone, and daughter, Gisela, were seized. Yet in that moment of terror, Mercedes Lacombe performed a crucial act. She was a picture of quiet heroism. She deliberately destroyed vital Brutus network documents. This act saved countless lives. It allowed the network to continue its desperate fight. Her quick thinking, cradling a baby while burning incriminating papers in warm, soapy water, even hiding fragments in a diaper, underscored the intelligence and bravery of seemingly ordinary people. Arthur, meanwhile, had grown increasingly confident in his persona as Georges Lambert. He was the deaf-mute agricultural worker. He moved through Toulouse, observing German troop movements and identifying targets for Allied bombers. His carefully cultivated blank expression was a shield against suspicion, but the constant dance with danger had an inevitable end. The suspicious Gestapo agent, who had previously scrutinized his papers, finally spotted Arthur at the Frascati Café. In a flash of quick thinking, Arthur dropped a tray of dishes. This created a diversion that allowed him to conceal incriminating papers before he was seized. He was dragged to the Gestapo headquarters. It was a chilling building that reeked of the horrors of the Inquisition. He was thrown into a dank, windowless cell. The interrogation was brutal. It was a test of his absolute resolve. Interrogators, their breath reeking of beer and onion, beat him savagely. They poured frigid water in his face. They demanded names. With blood pouring from his mouth, Arthur steeled himself. He maintained his deaf-mute cover. He refused to speak. He endured the escalating brutality and threats of execution. Learning of Arthur's capture, Marcel Thayandier became resolute. He was Arthur's handler and the dapper, ruthless leader of the Mohange network. His deep commitment to Arthur was absolute. The Mohange network was unique in its audacious infiltration of both the Vichy police and the Gestapo itself. It now put its inside men to the ultimate test. Agents like Henry, a Vichy police captain, and especially Geno, a formidable Gestapo agent with huge shoulders and feral amber eyes, moved swiftly. Geno, risking his deep cover, dramatically entered the Gestapo headquarters. He intimidated other agents before retrieving a battered Arthur from his cell. The metallic rasp of the heavy, scarred steel door signaled his release. It was an audacious rescue. It was a testament to the profound bonds and unwavering commitment within the resistance. It challenged any monolithic idea of what resistance truly looked like. Arthur was spirited away to a remote Maquis hideout. It was a damp, dark lair where some 20 men hid from German patrols and Vichy police. He convalesced, grappling with his injuries and the psychological scars of interrogation. He was surrounded by the rough comfort of camaraderie and the defiant messages, like Victoire and Vive de Gaulle, scratched on the walls. Yet, even as Arthur recovered, the brutal reality of resistance work continued its agonizing toll. In L'Esparre, the Maquis where Dr. Pierre Chauvin had been hiding was raided and destroyed by dozens of German soldiers. Many resistance fighters perished in the flames. Giselle Chauvin, after her capture, was transferred to Fresnes prison. It was a place notorious for systematic torture, starvation, and the beheading of women who refused to betray their comrades. Her harrowing ordeal underscored the immense personal sacrifices made by those who dared to resist. Amidst these grim developments, the Mohange network continued its relentless operations. A strike on a Gestapo outpost yielded a literal treasure trove of Nazi and police files. These included top-secret documents revealing the capture of a high-value British pilot, Lieutenant Richard Frank Wharton Cleaver. The Nazis intended to use Cleaver, an RF bomber squadron leader and recipient of the Distinguished Service Order, for propaganda broadcasts by Axis Sally. Arthur, having demonstrated his mettle and unwavering silence under torture, eagerly volunteered for the mission. He asked Thayandier, "Can I go with you?" On April 9, 1944, Cleaver's 25th birthday, Thayandier and his operatives launched a dramatic raid on the blockhouse where the British pilot was held. A grenade blast blew open the front door. Amidst shouts, small arms fire, and agonizing screams, Cleaver was freed from his chain with a single pistol shot. He was then whisked away in a dark sedan, bruised and bloody. Cleaver was taken to a safe house where he met Arthur. There was an initial flicker of disappointment in Arthur. Perhaps it was at Cleaver's perceived blue blood or effete British mannerisms that sometimes grated on American airmen. But Cleaver, assessing Arthur, noted that he reminded him of his own flight engineer. It was a role demanding high intelligence and quick thinking under duress. This observation hinted at the deep trust and mutual reliance inherent in their shared experience. Under the care of Marie-Louise Dessard, known as Francois, the formidable head of the Pat O'Leary line, the two men began to forge an unlikely friendship. One was an American Jew from the Bronx. The other was a British aristocrat. Over several glasses of wine, their initial rapport deepened. It was built on mutual reliance and trust. They discussed deeply personal matters. Their bond transcended national and social divides. It was a crucial connection as they prepared for the perilous journey ahead. Their very lives depended on each other. The mountains loomed. They were a hulking mass of rock and snow. It was a stark, beautiful, and terrifying transition from the relative safety of the French resistance network. Arthur and Cleaver, now under the guidance of 4 mountain guides, had traded the mud-stained farm truck for an arduous ascent into the treacherous Pyrenees. The air grew colder and thinner with every upward step. Their lungs burned, fingers were numb and swollen, then scarlet from the relentless cold. Arthur's back, still aching from his crash, screamed in protest with every labored breath. They were not equipped for this war against nature. They lacked proper boots, gloves, and thick coats. They relied instead on sheer willpower and the meager rations of hard biscuits, cheese, and dried fruit. They carefully conserved sips of brandy for warmth. After what felt like an eternity of pushing past their physical and mental limits, the desperate race to the Spanish border reached its apex. German Alpine troops, heavily armed and expertly trained, were in active pursuit. Their long-range Mauser sniper rifles cracked in the rarefied air. Bullets whistled across the gaps between peaks. They slammed against granite walls. They ricocheted with grating whines. They sent a stinging spray of splinters and sheared off bark. Arthur, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, pushed forward. He was gasping for breath. He was certain this was the end. But then, as the Spanish border bridge appeared less than 150 meters ahead, the Germans inexplicably halted. A moment of bewildered relief washed over Arthur as he realized why. Heavily armed Spanish partisans, positioned on the French side of the crossing, stood as an imposing deterrent. Their presence was a silent, powerful shield. It allowed Arthur, Cleaver, and Emile to successfully cross into Spain. The sudden cessation of pursuit, the quiet defiance of the partisans, was a small but profound victory in a journey where capture or death had been a constant possibility. They arrived in Figueras. It was a town still bearing the scars of the Spanish Civil War. Its buildings were scorched but resilient. The colossal fortress of Sant Ferran was a silent sentinel above the streets. They found refuge in a dusty, thick-walled stucco safe-house. Its first floor was empty. A staircase had collapsed. It was a stark transition from mountain trek to urban evasion. But neutral Spain, they soon discovered, was far from a safe haven. General Francisco Franco was walking a tightrope of cautious neutrality. He feared a German invasion if he openly sided with the Allies. Yet, he tolerated Nazi efforts to apprehend escapees. This fragile stance meant that the landscape was rife with Nazi agents and collaborators. Every shadow was a potential trap. German agents, it was well known, held more legal standing in Spain than Allied consular officials. They frequently lured unsuspecting airmen with liquor and brothels. They would then capture them and smuggle them back to prison camps. This precarious reality debunked any notion of Spain as a completely safe sanctuary. The pervasive danger extended beyond physical capture. Coincidentally, on the very day Arthur and Cleaver crossed into Spain, the Gestapo dealt a crippling blow to the Morhange resistance network. Back in Toulouse, Marcel Thénardier, the network's leader, was forced into hiding after his lieutenant, Achille Viadoux, was unmasked and executed. Viadoux was a deep-cover agent for French counterespionage. Viadoux's unmasking highlighted the Gestapo's increasing effectiveness and the heightened, ruthless threat to the resistance. It was a chilling reminder of the high cost of defiance. After recuperating and navigating the spy-infested urban landscape, Arthur and Cleaver successfully acquired new identification papers in Barcelona. It was a crucial shield against the constant scrutiny of Spanish authorities and Nazi agents. From Barcelona, their journey continued through Madrid and then to Seville. The drive to Algeciras, however, presented a heightened level of danger. Outside the city, an extensive checkpoint awaited them. It was manned by heavily armed police and civil guards in German-issue uniforms. They were often accompanied by German agents. These agents, willing to pay far more than escapees could offer, were particularly vigilant for high-value targets like Cleaver. The final leg of their escape, a 7-mile boat trip from Algeciras to Gibraltar, was deemed the most dangerous. Arthur, now in clean clothes and shoes, made a decisive choice. He would accompany Cleaver on this perilous route. He prioritized his fellow airmen's safety for the nerve-wracking dash to freedom across the dark, choppy waters. The massive, algae-flecked granite, Rock of Gibraltar, jutted from the dark blue waters. It was a distant promise of salvation. Their arrival in Gibraltar marked the culmination of 6 perilous months on the run. It was a hard-won freedom for Arthur and Cleaver. Yet, even as they found safety, the grim reality of the war continued to extract its toll on those who had helped them. News eventually reached Arthur. Marcel Théondier, the dapper and ruthless leader of the Morhang Bear, his trusted handler and the man who had orchestrated so much of Arthur's survival, had been captured and executed by the Gestapo near Toulouse. His body was displayed with a chilling Death to France sign. It was a stark warning to all who dared resist. The tragic news served as a brutal reminder of the ruthlessness of the Gestapo. It was also a reminder of the immense, often fatal cost of resistance. It was a somber counterpoint to Arthur's hard-won, if deeply scarred, freedom. The stark cliffs of Gibraltar, a beacon of safety after 6 months of relentless evasion, offered Arthur and Cleaver a temporary respite. Here, in the labyrinthine tunnels of the rock, they were welcomed by British and American officers. These included Colonel Horace W. Forster. He offered a formal return to the war. Arthur, still battling a frostbitten body and a back that screamed with every movement, endured a meticulous debriefing. He filled out questionnaires, recounting his harrowing journey. But the most profound part of this process was the aphoristic document he signed. This was a lifelong pledge of silence. It was a burden that would seal off the escape routes and the identities of his helpers. It would forever lock away a crucial part of his ordeal. He made a conscious decision not to speak ill of his pilot, Second Lieutenant Philip J. Chase. This was despite the raw, bitter conviction that Chase and his co-pilot had abandoned their crew. "Dad, they were the first 2 guys out of the plane," he would later confess to his father. It was a private anguish that hinted at a deeper truth he felt compelled to suppress. This enforced silence, a necessary evil for the continued operation of escape lines, would become a lasting psychological burden. It left the survivors of such ordeals with unaddressed trauma. Their nightmares were a testament to the horrors they could not voice. As Arthur departed Gibraltar for Bristol, England, on June 17, 1944, his journey back to the war effort was underway. This was just days after the Normandy landing solidified Franco's reduced assistance to the Axis, but the war had already come home within him. The physical ailments and the psychological strain of months on the run had left their indelible marks. It was a silent testament to the resilience and suffering he carried. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of war had been waged in the Meyerowitz household. For 6 agonizing months, Arthur was merely a name on a missing airman telegram. Then, on June 16, 1944, a cablegram from Gibraltar ignited a spark of hope. The Western Union telegram that reached his brother Seymour was a seismic shift from despair to elation. Seymour, discovering the yellow envelope, felt a rush of dread morph into a kind of hysterical joy. He read the words, "Dear folks and Seymour, everything okay here. Hope to be seeing you all very soon, my love. To everyone, love, Arthur Meyerowitz." The news rippled through their Rockaway Beach neighborhood. A candy store clerk, overwhelmed by the joyous reversal of fate, raced onto the beach with a hand-scrawled sign. It read, "MR and MR and MR. Meyerowitz, your son, is alive." Arthur's girlfriend, Esther Lowe, deeply in love and emotionally exhausted by the long wait, was stunned by the news. The weight of 6 months of grief lifted in an instant. Arthur eventually returned home. He was a quiet figure, circling his building 3 times before finally stepping into the sea of relatives that awaited him. The reunion was emotional beyond belief. It was a profound embrace that marked his transition from active evasion to civilian life. Yet, The war was not easily left behind. He never complained or whined about anything. But the nightmares of that horrible mission above occupied France would torment him for the rest of his life. It was a constant, unyielding echo of the violence and betrayal he witnessed. It was only in the post-war years that the full, somber truth about his courageous helpers began to emerge. It cast a long shadow over his hard-won freedom. Marcel Tailandier, the dapper and ruthless leader of the Morhang network, his trusted handler, was confirmed to have been killed by the Gestapo near Toulouse. It was a terrible loss that disorganized their entire team. His body, displayed with a chilling "Death to France" sign, was a stark warning of the immense personal cost of resistance. Gisèle Chauvin, another pivotal helper, was arrested by the Gestapo in June 1944. She endured unimaginable horrors across 3 concentration camps. These were New Brem, Ravensbrück, and Sachsenhausen. Liberated in 1945, she returned to her husband Pierre and their children as a virtual scarecrow. She forever bore the physical and psychological scars of her imprisonment and torture. Her spirit, remarkably, remained unbroken. Tailandier's remains were eventually reinterred beneath a monument. It was a national recognition of his sacrifice. It was a small measure of justice for a man who gave everything. Decades later, long after Arthur S. Meyerowitz passed away in March 1971, his grandson, Seth Meyerowitz, stumbled upon fragments of his grandfather's past. Arthur had carried his untold story and the burden of silence. It led Seth to Europe in January 2012. Through meticulous archival research, sifting through service files and POW records, he began to piece together Arthur's full, long-hidden saga. This journey connected him with Bernard Boyer, a scholar of the Resistance. Most powerfully, it connected him with Patrick, Gisèle Chauvin's son. Seth's visit to France in January 2015, 71 years after Arthur's own harrowing entry, bridged the chasm between past and present. It gave Arthur's voice to tell the story. This narrative stands as a profound tribute. It is not just to Arthur Meyerowitz, it is to the countless unsung heroes of the French resistance. It illuminates the immense human cost of a war fought on the ground. It is distinct from the grand strategies and battles of armies. Ordinary citizens became extraordinary agents of defiance. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of individuals across borders. An American Jew, a British aristocrat, French farmers, doctors and resistance fighters. Their acts of courage and kindness forged bonds stronger than any ideology. By preserving these hidden stories, this narrative challenges the idea of a purely heroic and straightforward path to combat heroism. It reveals the nuanced and often brutal realities behind the simplified narratives of war. It ensures posthumous recognition and honors for those who served. It establishes figures like Marcel Tailandier and Gisèle Chauvin as heroes. They are enduring symbols of the indomitable spirit of the resistance.